The snow fell in thick, angry sheets as I watched the taillights of Elliot's car fade into the darkness. My thin nightgown and hastily thrown-on coat offered little protection against the biting January wind. I couldn't feel my feet anymore, just the hot tears streaming down my face, instantly freezing against my skin. Highway 73 stretched empty in both directions, nothing but pine trees and darkness for miles, no streetlights, no houses, just wilderness and the growing realization that my husband of 7 years had just abandoned me to freeze to death. "He'll come back," I whispered to myself, hugging my body as another violent shiver racked my frame. "He always comes back," but this time felt different. The look in his eyes when he dragged me from bed had been cold, determined. The argument from earlier about the dinner I'd burned while helping his mother on the phone with her new iPad had escalated beyond our usual fights. I'd seen a new darkness in Elliot Thorne, something that frightened me more than the thought of freezing to death on this deserted road. Headlights appeared in the distance, and for a moment, hope surged through me. But no, these lights were higher off the ground than Elliot's sedan. As the vehicle approached, I could make out a red BMW X5, slowing as it neared me. My knees nearly buckled with relief when I recognized the driver. My father, Harlan Zamatis, rolled down the window, his face a mixture of concern and barely contained fury. "Alina!" "My God, get in." "Dad? How did you—" My teeth chattered too violently to finish the question. He reached across and pushed open the passenger door. "Get in now." Questions later. I climbed into the blessed warmth of his car, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. Dad pulled a thick wool blanket from the back seat and wrapped it around me before cranking the heat higher. The familiar scent of his aftershave, sandalwood and cedar, brought me back to childhood, to safety. I couldn't stop the sobs that finally broke free. "He left me here, Dad." He just left me. Dad's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. "I know, sweetheart. I know." "How did you find me?" I asked, gradually regaining control of my breathing as the car's heat began to thaw my frozen limbs. Dad's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead as he executed a careful U-turn. "Elliot called me," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "He said if I wanted to keep my daughter alive, I'd better come get her. Said you needed to be taught a lesson about respecting your husband." He spat out the last words like they tasted foul. Fresh tears spilled from my eyes. He wouldn't really have left me to die, would he? Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. "Let's get you home and warmed up." "Then we need to talk, really talk, Alina." We drove in silence after that, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the heavy snow. I stared out the window, my mind replaying the events that had led to this night. 7 years of marriage to Elliot had been a slow descent into isolation. First, my friends disappeared from my life. Then contact with my co-workers dwindled as Elliot convinced me to quit my job at the architectural firm, insisting his investment banking salary was more than enough for both of us. My family was the final frontier, the last connection he hadn't managed to completely sever. Dad had never liked Elliot, though he'd respected my choice and kept his opinions largely to himself. My mother had passed away when I was 25, just a year before I met Elliot, and Dad had been careful not to push me away, even when he clearly disapproved of my relationship. Tonight, that restraint had probably saved my life. When we pulled into my father's driveway instead of heading toward the home I shared with Elliot, I didn't question it. His sprawling Victorian-style house was exactly as I remembered, warm lights glowing from within, promising security. Dad helped me inside, supporting my still shaking body as we made our way to the kitchen. He sat me at the familiar oak table and set about making hot chocolate the way he used to when I was young. Real chocolate melted slowly on the stove with a dash of cinnamon and vanilla. I clutched the blanket around me, feeling oddly disconnected from reality. How had my life come to this? When had I become a woman whose husband would abandon her on a deserted highway in the middle of a snowstorm? Dad placed a steaming mug in front of me, then sat across the table. At 63, Harlan Zematis was still an imposing figure, 6'2" with broad shoulders and a full head of silver hair. His blue eyes, so like my own, held a lifetime of wisdom and, at the moment, carefully controlled rage. "This isn't the first time, is it?" he asked quietly. I stared into my mug, watching the steam curl upward. Not like this. He's never done anything like this before. But other things, other cruelties. My silence was answer enough. Dad took a deep breath. "I've respected your independence, Alina." Maybe too much. I told myself that as long as you were happy, I would accept your choices. But tonight, his voice broke slightly. Tonight, I realized I've failed you by staying silent. "You haven't failed me," I whispered. "I'm the one who failed. I should have been stronger. Should have seen what was happening." "No." Dad's voice was firm. "What Elliot has done to you is still doing to you. This isn't about your strength or weakness. This is about his need for control." I took a sip of the hot chocolate, letting its warmth spread through me. "How did you know?" "All these years when I've been pretending everything was fine," Dad's expression softened. "Because you're my daughter, and I know when your smile doesn't reach your eyes. Because every time I see you, you're a little quieter, a little more careful with your words. Because you flinch when someone moves too quickly near you, even though you try to hide it." Tears filled my eyes again. I'd become so adept at hiding the reality of my marriage that I had convinced myself no one could see through the facade. But my father had seen everything. "Where is Elliot now?" I asked. "I don't know. After he called me, I tried calling him back, but he didn't answer." Dad's expression darkened. "But I know where he'll eventually go. Back to your house. And we need to decide what happens next, before he does." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, feeling the familiar panic rise in my chest. "He'll be so angry, Dad." "You don't understand how he gets when he's angry." "I think I do understand, Alina. More than you know." Dad reached across the table and gently took my hand, turning it palm up. With careful fingers, he pushed back the sleeve of my coat, revealing the fading yellowish bruise circling my wrist. I hadn't even realized it was visible. I pulled my hand away, ashamed. "It's not what you think." I fell, and he tried to catch me. "Stop." Dad's voice was gentle but firm. "Stop protecting him." Not with me, and not anymore. Something broke inside me then. The carefully constructed wall I'd built to contain the truth of my life with Elliot. I told my father everything. How Elliot's charming exterior masked a man whose insecurities fueled a relentless need for control. How his concern for my well-being had become the chains that kept me isolated from anyone who might help me see the truth. How his temper had evolved from shouting to throwing things, to eventually laying hands on me, always in ways that could be explained away, always followed by passionate apologies and promises to change. As I spoke, I watched my father's expression shift from concern to horror to a cold, contained fury I'd never seen before. When I finally fell silent, emotionally drained, he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the still falling snow. "You're not going back to him," he said with quiet certainty. "Not tonight. Not ever." "Dad, it's not that simple. All my things, my life, things can be replaced. Your life cannot." He turned to face me. I lost your mother, Alina. I will not lose you too. Not to a man who would leave you to die in a snowstorm to teach you a lesson. The resolve in his voice struck something deep within me, a chord of recognition. My father had always been strong, but with a gentleness that made his strength easy to forget. Tonight, I was seeing the steel beneath the softness, and it reminded me of something I'd lost, my own strength. I'm scared, I admitted. I know, but you're not alone anymore. Dad checked his watch. It's nearly 3 a.m. Try to get some sleep. We'll figure out our next steps when you've rested. He led me to my old bedroom, which he'd maintained exactly as I'd left it before college. Pale blue walls, bookshelves lined with my favorite childhood stories, and the handmade quilt my mother had created for my 16th birthday. I sank onto the familiar bed, exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline that had kept me going. Dad? I called as he turned to leave. Thank you for coming to get me. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. I will always come for you, Alina. Always. Now rest. Sleep claimed me almost instantly, but my dreams were fractured things. Images of Elliot's face contorted with rage, of endless snow-covered roads with no escape, of my mother's voice calling me from somewhere I couldn't reach. I woke with a start around noon, momentarily disoriented by the familiar yet strange surroundings of my childhood bedroom. The events of the previous night crashed back into my consciousness, bringing with them a fresh wave of shame and fear. What would happen when Elliot realized I hadn't come crawling back home, begging forgiveness for whatever imagined transgression had sparked his rage this time? The thought sent ice through my veins. I made my way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and the low murmur of voices. In the kitchen, I found my father sitting at the table with a woman I recognized as Maraude Levesque, his longtime friend and a family law attorney. They both looked up as I entered, their conversation halting abruptly. Maraude stood and embraced me. Her familiar perfume, something with notes of jasmine, enveloping me briefly. Alina, I wish we were seeing each other under better circumstances, she said, holding me at arm's length and studying my face with keen brown eyes. At 57, Maraude was still striking, tall and willowy, with dark hair streaked dramatically with silver. I glanced at my father questioningly. I called Maraude this morning, he explained, pouring me a cup of coffee. We need to understand our options. Options? I repeated, accepting the mug gratefully. Maraude resumed her seat, her professional demeanor softening with compassion. Your father has told me some of what's been happening, Alina. Before we go any further, I need to ask, do you want to press criminal charges against Elliot for last night? Abandoning you in those conditions could be considered attempted murder or, at minimum, reckless endangerment. My heart pounded in my chest. Charges? I don't know. I just want to be safe. That's our priority, Dad said firmly. Maraude nodded. Then let's start with a restraining order. Given the circumstances, we should be able to get an emergency temporary order today. It won't be permanently binding until after a hearing, but it will legally prevent Elliot from contacting you or coming near you in the meantime. As Maraude outlined the process, I felt a curious mixture of relief and terror. Taking legal action against Elliot seemed simultaneously liberating and dangerous. He'd always been so careful to maintain his public image. Successful, charming, the perfect husband. How would he react when that facade was threatened? What about our house? I asked. All my things are there. We'll arrange for a police escort to retrieve your essential belongings. Maraude replied. But Alina, I need to ask, is there anything else we should know? Financial concerns, joint accounts, other properties? I thought about the careful way Elliot had structured our finances, my name removed from most accounts after I'd quit my job, the house deed transferred solely to him last year for tax purposes, The realization of how thoroughly he'd isolated me financially hit like a physical blow. I think he's made sure I have nothing without him, I admitted, the words tasting bitter. Dad and Murad exchanged glances. That's financial abuse, and it's part of the pattern, Murad said gently. But we can address that too. For now, let's focus on your immediate safety. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Murad made calls from her cell phone. Dad drove me to the courthouse to sign paperwork for the emergency restraining order, and by late afternoon, we had a temporary legal document prohibiting Elliot from coming within 500 feet of me or contacting me in any way. Through it all, my phone remained ominously silent. No calls or texts from Elliot demanding to know where I was, no threats, nothing. The silence was almost more terrifying than his anger would have been. He's planning something, I said to Dad as we drove back from the courthouse. He never just lets things go. Dad's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Let him plan. You're not alone anymore. When we arrived home, there was an unfamiliar car in the driveway, a sleek black sedan with rental plates. Dad tensed immediately, positioning himself between me and the house as we approached. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing a woman I hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. Tall and elegant, even at 70, with the same silver-streaked dark hair as my father. Her familiar face broke into a relieved smile when she saw us. "Thank God," she said, hurrying down the steps to embrace me. I came as soon as I got Harlan's message. "Aunt Vespera?" I managed, stunned by the appearance of my father's sister. She had moved to Switzerland when I was a teenager, after a falling out with my father that neither of them had ever fully explained to me. Of course it's me. Who else would drop everything and fly across an ocean when my niece needs me? She pulled back, studying my face with eyes that matched my father's exactly. You look exhausted, poor thing. Come inside before you catch your death in this cold. I glanced at Dad, who looked simultaneously relieved and uncomfortable. I called Vespera last night, he explained. Some situations require all hands on deck. Inside, Aunt Vespera had already taken over the kitchen, preparing what smelled like her famous Hungarian goulash. The familiar scent brought back memories of family dinners before the rift between her and my father, before my mother's death, before everything had changed. Sit, she commanded, pouring 3 glasses of red wine. Drink. Then we talk. We sat at the kitchen table, the scene so reminiscent of countless family dinners from my childhood that I felt tears threatening again. Aunt Vespera had always been a force of nature, opinionated, fiercely protective, and utterly fearless. She and my father had been inseparable until their mysterious falling out. "So," she said, fixing me with a direct stare after we'd each taken a sip of wine. "Harlan tells me this husband of yours is a monster hiding behind a respectable facade." "Vespera," Dad warned, gently. She waved him off. Gentle is what allowed this situation to continue for 7 years. "No, we will speak plainly now." She turned back to me. "Your father also tells me you've finally taken legal steps to protect yourself. Good. Now we need to ensure this man can never hurt you again." "We've got the restraining order," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "A piece of paper?" Aunt Vespera scoffed. "Important, yes, but not enough. Men like your Elliot, they don't respect papers and laws. They respect only power and consequences." Dad sighed. "What Vespera means is that we need to think about long-term safety, not just immediate legal protections." I looked between them, sensing an undercurrent I didn't fully understand. "Why did you call her, Dad?" After all these years of not speaking, a heavy silence fell. Aunt Vespera and my father exchanged a loaded glance. "Because," Aunt Vespera said finally, "your father and I have experience with men like Elliot. More than you know." Before she could elaborate, the doorbell rang. Dad rose immediately, his posture tense. "Are you expecting anyone?" I asked, fear instantly constricting my chest. "The police escort," he replied, for retrieving your things. Murat arranged it for this evening. Sure enough, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. They introduced themselves as Officers Kendrick and Pelletier. We understand you need to retrieve personal belongings from a residence where you have a restraining order against the occupant, Officer Pelletier said, her voice professional but kind. Yes, I confirmed. My husband... We've been briefed on the situation, Officer Kendrick interrupted gently. We'll accompany you to ensure there are no issues. But we should go now, while we know the residence is empty. Empty? I repeated. How do you know it's empty? The officers exchanged glances. Mr. Thorne was observed leaving the property approximately 30 minutes ago. This gives us a safe window to retrieve your belongings. Dad grabbed his keys. I'm coming too. So am I, declared Aunt Vespera, already putting on her coat. Officer Kendrick looked like he wanted to object, but something in Aunt Vespera's expression made him reconsider. Very well, but please follow our instructions precisely. These situations can escalate quickly if the restrained party returns unexpectedly. The drive to the house I'd shared with Elliot felt surreal. Located in an upscale neighborhood of large, modern homes set back from the street behind manicured lawns, our house had always seemed like a showpiece rather than a home. Elliot's taste in minimalist design, creating an atmosphere more suited to a furniture catalog than a lived-in space. As we pulled into the driveway behind the police cruiser, I felt a wave of nausea. This place, which should have represented safety and comfort, now loomed before me like a beautiful trap I'd barely escaped. You don't have to go in if you don't want to, Dad said quietly. Just tell us what you need, and we can get it for you. I shook my head. No, I need to do this myself. Inside, everything was immaculate, as always. No sign of the violent argument that had preceded Elliot dragging me from our bed last night. The officers swept through the house efficiently, confirming it was empty before allowing us to begin collecting my things. You have 30 minutes, Officer Pelletier advised. Focus on essentials, clothing, medications, personal documents, irreplaceable items. Aunt Vespera took charge immediately, producing empty suitcases from the hall closet and directing Dad to gather items from the bathroom while she tackled the closet. I stood frozen in the bedroom doorway, overwhelmed by the task and the memories assaulting me from every corner. Alina, Aunt Vespera called sharply, breaking my paralysis. Your important documents! Where are they? Her question snapped me back to the present. In the home office. Filing cabinet. I moved through the house mechanically, gathering my passport, birth certificate, and the few financial documents that still bore my name. In the spare bedroom that I had once used as my studio before Elliot convinced me it was cluttering the house, I found my architecture portfolios and sketches boxed up and shoved into the closet. I grabbed those too, along with the small wooden box containing the jewelry my mother had left me. The one thing I'd absolutely refused to let Elliot lock away in the safe to which only he knew the combination. As I passed the main bathroom, a detail caught my eye. A second toothbrush in the holder beside Elliot's. A woman's toothbrush, pink and clearly new. My stomach lurched with a different kind of nausea. So there was someone else. Part of me had always suspected, but the concrete evidence still felt like a slap. Alina, we need to go, Dad called from downstairs. Officers say we've been here 20 minutes already. I hurried back to the bedroom, where Aunt Vespera had efficiently packed 2 suitcases with my clothing and personal items. As I zipped the final bag, my eyes fell on the framed photo on Elliot's nightstand. Our wedding day, both of us smiling radiantly at the camera. I picked it up, studying the face of the woman I'd been 7 years ago. Hopeful, in love, with no idea of what was coming. With sudden resolve, I removed the photo from the frame and tore it neatly in half, separating my image from Elliot's. I left his half on the bed and tucked mine into my purse. "Let's go," I said. We had just loaded the last bag into Dad's car when another vehicle turned onto our street, Elliot's sleek black Mercedes. I froze, watching it approach with mounting terror. "Get in the car," Officer Kendrick ordered, positioning himself between our vehicles and the approaching Mercedes. Officer Pelletier spoke rapidly into her radio, requesting backup. I couldn't move, my feet seemingly rooted to the driveway as Elliot's car screeched to a halt. He emerged looking nothing like the man who had abandoned me on a snowy roadside last night, perfectly dressed in one of his expensive suits, hair neatly styled, expression one of wounded confusion rather than rage. "Elena?" he called, his voice carrying the perfect note of husbandly concern. "What's going on here? Are you all right?" "Sir, please stay where you are," Officer Pelletier commanded, moving to intercept him. "There is a restraining order prohibiting you from approaching Mrs. Thorne." Elliot's facade slipped for just a second, a flash of fury crossing his features before the mask of concern returned. "A restraining order? There must be some mistake. My wife and I had a minor disagreement last night, that's all." "A minor disagreement?" Dad's voice cut through the tension. He stepped forward, barely restrained fury evident in every line of his body. "You abandoned my daughter on a deserted highway in the middle of a snowstorm. You left her to die." Elliot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Harlan, I think you're exaggerating the situation. Elena and I had an argument, and I perhaps reacted poorly, but I came back for her within minutes. When I didn't find her, I naturally assumed she'd called you." The bold-faced lie struck me like a physical blow. He'd come back after explicitly calling my father to rescue me. "Sir, regardless of your version of events, the restraining order is in effect," Officer Kendrick stated firmly. "You need to return to your vehicle and leave the premises immediately." Elliot ignored him, his gaze fixed on me. "Elena, sweetheart, this is unnecessary. Come home. We can talk about this like adults." His voice held the silky persuasion that had always worked before, the tone that made me doubt my own perceptions, that made me believe I was overreacting, that convinced me to forgive the unforgivable time and again. But something had changed. Perhaps it was seeing him here, lying so effortlessly to the police. Perhaps it was the pink toothbrush in our bathroom. Or perhaps it was simply having my father and aunt beside me, witnesses to the manipulation I'd endured alone for so long. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm not coming back, Elliot." "Not now, not ever." Something ugly flashed across his handsome face. "You don't mean that. You're upset, and your father has been filling your head with nonsense. You know you can't manage without me, Elena. What will you do? Where will you go? You have nothing without me." Each word was carefully chosen to remind me of my dependence, to highlight my vulnerability. Before, such statements would have paralyzed me with fear of an uncertain future. Now, they only strengthened my resolve. "Sir, this is your final warning," Officer Pelletier stated. "Return to your vehicle, or you will be arrested for violating the restraining order." For a moment, I thought Elliot would refuse. The calculation was visible in his eyes as he weighed his options. Finally, he stepped back, his expression smoothing into a pleasant smile. "Of course, officer. I respect the law." He looked directly at me. "This isn't over, Elena. When you come to your senses, I'll be waiting." The threat beneath the cordial words was unmistakable. As Elliot returned to his car and drove away, I felt my knees weaken with delayed reaction. "Let's go," Dad said quietly, guiding me into his car. "He won't bother you again tonight." But we all knew that wasn't true. This was just the beginning. Back at Dad's house, we unloaded my belongings in silence, each of us processing the encounter in our own way. Once inside, Aunt Vespera immediately poured 4 glasses of brandy, 1 each for the 3 of us, plus Murad, who had arrived during our absence. To courage? Aunt Vespera toasted, raising her glass. It runs in the family. I took a sip of the strong liquor, letting it burn its way down my throat. He's not going to stop, I said, giving voice to my greatest fear. You saw him. The restraining order is just a piece of paper to him, which is why we need to be more proactive, Murad replied, her legal mind clearly analyzing the situation from all angles. The temporary restraining order is just that, temporary. We need to file for divorce immediately, with a permanent protection order as part of the settlement. Divorce. The word hung in the air, simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that mourned the future I'd believed in when I'd said my vows 7 years ago. He'll fight it, I warned. Elliot hates to lose at anything. Let him fight, Dad said grimly. Some battles need to be fought regardless of how difficult they are. Aunt Vespera set her glass down with a decisive clink. Alina, there's something you need to know. Something that might help you understand why your father and I are so adamant about helping you escape this marriage. She glanced at Dad, who nodded slightly. It's time she knew. Knew what? I asked, looking between them. Dad took a deep breath. Your mother didn't die of heart failure, Alina. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What? Of course she did. That's what the doctor said. You said. I lied, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Not about her death, but about the circumstances. Your mother took her own life, Alina. After 25 years in an abusive marriage much like yours, the brandy glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. No one moved to clean it up. That's not possible, I whispered. Mom and you loved each other. Everyone always said what a perfect marriage you had. Perfect on the outside, Aunt Vespera said softly, a nightmare behind closed doors. Dad's eyes were filled with a pain I'd never seen before, raw and ancient. I was like Elliot, Alina, charming in public, a monster at home. I controlled your mother's every move, isolated her from friends and family, made her believe she was worthless without me. No, I shook my head in denial. I would have known. I would have seen. Children see what they're allowed to see, Aunt Vespera interrupted. Your father was very careful to maintain the facade of a loving family man. It wasn't until you left for college that Marianne finally confided in me about what she'd been enduring. I don't understand, I said, my mind reeling. If this is true, why didn't you help her leave? Why didn't she divorce you? Dad's shoulders slumped with the weight of old guilt. She tried once. I threatened to take you away from her, to use my money and connections to ensure she'd never see you again. She believed me, because by then, I'd demonstrated exactly what I was capable of. That's why you and Aunt Vespera stopped speaking, I realized, the pieces falling into place. She tried to help Mom, Vespera nodded. I offered your mother a way out, a place to stay in Switzerland, far from your father's influence. But she wouldn't leave without you, and you were in your 2nd year of college, still believing your father hung the moon. So she stayed, I whispered, and eventually, she couldn't see any other escape, Dad confirmed, tears now streaming freely down his face. She left a note. It said only, I can't live this way anymore. Please be a better man for Alina. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of pain. I stared at my father. This man I had adored all my life. This man I'd never truly known. How? I finally asked. How did you change? If you were like Elliot, Dad wiped his eyes. Your mother's death destroyed me, Alina. Not just with grief, but with the knowledge that I had caused it. That my cruelty, my need for control, had driven her to such desperation. He took a shaky breath. I spent 2 years in intensive therapy, confronting the darkest parts of myself. I rebuilt my entire life around one purpose: honoring your mother's final wish by becoming someone she could have been proud of. That's why you never remarried, I said, understanding dawning. Why you devoted yourself to charity work, to helping others. It was my penance, he admitted. But watching you fall into the same trap, seeing Elliot systematically isolate you the way I isolated your mother. His voice broke. I told myself I was respecting your choices, that interfering would only push you away. But I was a coward, afraid to confront my own past by speaking the truth. Aunt Vespera reached across the table to squeeze his hand, a gesture of forgiveness that spoke volumes about their own reconciliation. Last night, when Elliot called me, Dad continued, something inside me snapped. I heard my own voice from 20 years ago in his words. I saw the end point of that path, and I couldn't let history repeat itself. Not with you. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this revelation. My perfect childhood, the loving parents I'd idolized, had been a carefully constructed illusion. My gentle, adoring father had once been a man capable of driving my mother to suicide, and somehow, impossibly, he had transformed himself into the person who now sat before me. Tears streaming down his face as he confessed his darkest truths. I don't know what to say, I admitted finally. I don't know what to feel. You don't have to know right now, Murad said gently, speaking for the first time since Dad's revelation. But I hope this helps you understand why your father is so determined to help you escape your marriage. He knows exactly what Elliot is capable of, because he's walked that path himself. I failed your mother, Dad said, his voice steadying. I will not fail you too. I stared at my father, this complicated, flawed man who had remade himself out of grief and guilt, and found that while I couldn't quite reconcile this new knowledge with the father I'd always known, my love for him remained unchanged, perhaps even strengthened by his raw honesty. You haven't failed me, I said finally. You came when I needed you most. You're here now. We sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of decades-old secrets finally lifted from our family. So, Aunt Vespera said eventually, practical as always, now that the truth is out, we need to focus on the present crisis. Elliot is not going to respect that restraining order for long. Men like him, like your father once was, they see legal barriers as challenges to overcome, not boundaries to respect. What do you suggest? Murad asked, professional interest clear in her tone. Aunt Vespera's expression turned calculating. We need to understand what truly matters to Elliot. What does he value above all else? His reputation, I answered without hesitation. His image as a successful, respected businessman is everything to him. Then that's our leverage, Aunt Vespera declared. We need to gather evidence of his abusive behavior, not just for the divorce proceedings, but as insurance. Dad looked troubled. We need to be careful. Threatening to expose him could backfire dangerously. Men like Elliot, like I was, when cornered, they can become truly dangerous. I know, Aunt Vespera agreed grimly, which is why we need to be smart about this. Alina, do you have any evidence already? Not texts, emails, photographs of injuries, anything that documents the abuse? I thought about it. Some. I kept a journal for a while, hiding it in my studio, and I have some photos I took of bruises, though I always deleted them from my phone after saving them to a private email account. Good, Murad said, professional demeanor reasserting itself. That's a start. We'll need to retrieve that journal if possible and access that email account. The more documentation we have, the stronger your case will be, both for the divorce and for a permanent protection order. Dad stood abruptly. I need some air. He walked out onto the back porch without another word, his shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. Aunt Vespera watched him go with understanding in her eyes. This is difficult for him, confronting his past sins while trying to protect you from a man so similar to who he once was. Should I talk to him? I asked, uncertain. Give him a moment, she advised. In the meantime, let's focus on immediate practical matters. You need a phone that Elliot can't track, for one thing. The next hours passed in a flurry of activity, Murad making calls to expedite the divorce filing, Aunt Vespera arranging for a new phone and secure email account for me, Dad eventually rejoining us to help strategize. By evening, we had the outlines of a plan to legally extricate me from my marriage while maintaining my safety. What we didn't have was a way to neutralize the very real threat Elliot still posed. As sophisticated as our legal strategy might be, we all recognized the fundamental truth. A man like Elliot would not simply accept defeat and walk away, especially when his carefully cultivated image was at stake. That night, as I prepared for bed in my childhood room, Aunt Vespera knocked softly on my door. She entered carrying a small, ornate wooden box. "A gift," she said, placing it on my nightstand. "Something to help you sleep more soundly." I opened the box to find a small handgun nestled in velvet. "Vespera," I gasped, closing the lid quickly. I don't even know how to." "Tomorrow I will teach you," she said firmly. "I'm not suggesting you use it. I'm ensuring you have options if the worst happens." She sat beside me on the bed. "Your father doesn't know I brought this. He believes in redemption because he experienced it himself. But I believe in preparation because I've seen what happens when women like you and your mother have no means to protect themselves." She left me with the box, my thoughts in turmoil. The gun represented a line I'd never imagined crossing, an acknowledgement that the situation might escalate beyond what laws and restraining orders could contain. The thought terrified me, but a small voice inside whispered that perhaps terror was the appropriate response to my reality. I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with splintered images, my mother's face, never before associated with suffering, Elliot's rage, my father's tears, snow falling on an empty highway. I woke several times, gasping for breath, the walls of my childhood bedroom simultaneously comforting and confining. Dawn found me exhausted, but resolved. Whatever came next, I would face it with open eyes. No more illusions, no more denial. Downstairs, I found Dad already awake, nursing a cup of coffee as he stared out at the garden. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving everything blanketed in pristine white. "I keep thinking about your mother," he said without turning. "How different her life might have been if I'd been capable of change before it was too late." I poured myself a cup of coffee and joined him at the window. "Do you think people like Elliot can change? Like you did?" Dad considered the question carefully. "Some can. But it requires two things that are exceedingly rare: complete honesty with oneself about the harm one has caused, and a willingness to do the difficult work of transformation without expectation of forgiveness or reward." He glanced at me. "The change can't be for someone else, not to win you back, not to salvage his reputation. It must be for himself, because he genuinely wants to be a better man. And Elliot?" Dad's expression hardened. "I've met men like Elliot all my life. I was one, remember? The capacity for that kind of brutal self-honesty. I don't see it in him. So what happens now?" I asked, the question encompassing far more than just the immediate future. "Now we fight," Dad replied simply. "Legally, strategically, and if necessary, by other means." He reached out to squeeze my hand. "But whatever happens, you are not alone in this battle." Not anymore. The day unfolded with grim purpose. Murad arrived mid-morning with divorce papers ready for my signature. Dad made calls to security companies about installing an alarm system. Aunt Vespera, true to her word, took me to the basement where Dad had a small workshop and taught me the basics of handling the gun she'd given me: how to load it, how to use the safety, how to aim. I pray you never need this knowledge, she said, as I awkwardly held the weapon. But if you do, hesitation could cost you everything. By afternoon, the temporary peace was shattered by a call from Officer Pelletier. Elliot had been to the police station, presenting himself as a concerned husband worried about his mentally unstable wife who had filed a restraining order during a paranoid episode. He'd brought character witnesses, colleagues and friends who attested to his upstanding character and my increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. We're not fooled, Officer Pelletier assured me, but you should know he's systematically building a counter-narrative. He's telling people you had some kind of breakdown, and your father is exploiting the situation to separate you from your husband. That sounds like Elliot, I said bitterly, always 3 steps ahead with the manipulation. After the call, we gathered in the kitchen for a strategy session. Murad's legal perspective was cautiously optimistic. We had solid grounds for divorce and a protection order, but she acknowledged the effectiveness of Elliot's tactics. He's positioning himself as the victim, she explained. It's a common approach for abusers when confronted. They flip the script, making themselves the injured party. So what do we do? I asked, frustration mounting. Just wait for the courts to hopefully see through his act? Not exactly, Dad said, his expression resolute. I think it's time we consider fighting fire with fire. Aunt Vespera smiled thinly. I was wondering when you'd suggest that. Dad turned to me. Elliot's power comes from his carefully constructed image. What if we start systematically dismantling that image, just as he's trying to destroy yours? How? I asked. By telling the truth, he replied simply, to everyone who matters in his life. The plan that emerged was both simple and ruthless. We would contact key people in Elliot's life, his boss, colleagues, clients, even his parents, with documented evidence of his abuse, not as a threat or blackmail, but as a concerned intervention. Won't that just make him more dangerous? I worried. Possibly, Dad acknowledged, which is why we time it carefully, simultaneously, with the filing of the divorce papers and an application for a permanent protection order. We create a situation where any retaliation on his part would only further confirm the truth of our claims. Murad looked troubled. This strategy walks a fine legal line. We need to be careful not to cross into harassment or defamation. That's why we stick strictly to documented facts, Dad insisted. No embellishment, no emotional appeals, just the evidence presented with concern for Elliot's well-being and the safety of those around him. I recognized the elegant brutality of the approach. By framing the exposure as concern rather than revenge, we would be dismantling Elliot's carefully constructed facade while maintaining the moral high ground. It was the kind of psychological jujitsu that Elliot himself might have employed. Are we becoming just like him? I asked softly, using manipulation as a weapon. Dad met my gaze steadily. There's a difference between manipulation and strategy, Alina. Between cruelty and necessary force. The question is not whether we fight, but how we fight while maintaining our humanity. Aunt Vespera was less philosophical. Men like Elliot understand only one language, power. We are simply speaking to him in terms he comprehends. As evening fell, the immediate plans were in place. Tomorrow, Murad would file the divorce papers and application for a permanent protection order. Dad had arranged for a security company to install cameras and an alarm system at his house. Aunt Vespera had compiled a dossier of Elliot's abuse based on my journal entries and photographs. What none of us anticipated was Elliot's next move. The call came just after dinner, my new phone ringing with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Thorne? An unfamiliar male voice. This is Detective Rylands with the county sheriff's office. I'm calling regarding your husband, Elliot Thorne. My heart stuttered. What about him? There's been an incident at your residence, ma'am. Mr. Thorne has been taken to Mercy Hospital with significant injuries. He's asking for you." I put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. What kind of incident? What injuries? It appears Mr. Thorne was the victim of a home invasion. He was badly beaten. He's in stable condition but quite insistent on seeing you. Given the circumstances, we've been asked to inform you despite the restraining order. Dad and Aunt Vespera exchanged alarmed glances. Murad immediately took out her phone and began typing rapidly. "I have a restraining order against my husband," I reminded the detective. "I can't go to the hospital." "I understand, ma'am. However, Mr. Thorne is claiming you might have been involved in arranging the attack. He says you threatened him yesterday." The accusation was so outrageous that for a moment I couldn't speak. Dad stepped in smoothly. "Detective, this is Harlan Zemaitis, Alina's father. My daughter has been at my home continuously since last night, with multiple witnesses, including a family attorney. Furthermore, Officers Kendrick and Pelletier accompanied us to the Thorne residence yesterday to retrieve her belongings and can verify there were no threats made." A pause on the line. "I see. Well, we're still in the preliminary stages of the investigation. If Mrs. Thorne could come to the station tomorrow to make a statement, that would be helpful." After assurances that I would do so with my attorney present, the call ended. We stared at each other in stunned silence. "He did this to himself," Aunt Vespera said finally. "It's the perfect countermove, positioning himself as the victim of violence while implying your involvement." "Can he really get away with that?" I asked, horrified. Murad looked grim. "It's a clever tactic. Even if the police determine there was no actual home invasion, the damage to your credibility will already be done. People will wonder if you were involved, which undermines our entire strategy." "We need to get ahead of this," Dad insisted. "Contact the officers who accompanied us yesterday, secure alibis for all of us for the entire day, and prepare a statement for the police." The night descended into frantic activity. Calls to Officers Kendrick and Pelletier, who confirmed they would provide statements about our interaction with Elliot. Murad contacting colleagues who could verify her whereabouts. Dad pulling security footage from his home system, showing we had not left the property all day. By midnight, we had assembled a reasonable defense against Elliot's implicit accusation, but the psychological damage was done. Once again, he had managed to flip the narrative, casting himself as the victim and me as the potential aggressor. Even with our alibis, the mere suggestion that I might be capable of arranging violence against him would linger in the minds of everyone involved. "He's escalating," I said, as we finally prepared to get some rest. "This is only the beginning." Dad nodded grimly. "Which is why we need to accelerate our own plans. No more gradual approach. Tomorrow, we go on the offensive." Morning brought a flurry of activity. Murad left early to file the divorce papers and meet with the judge about a permanent protection order. Dad contacted the security company to expedite the installation of cameras and alarms. Aunt Vespera made several cryptic phone calls in rapid Hungarian to contacts overseas. I sat at the kitchen table finalizing my statement for the police when Murad called with unexpected news. "Elliot's been released from the hospital," she reported, "and he's filed for an emergency psychiatric evaluation order against you, claiming you're suffering from paranoid delusions and are a danger to yourself and others." "He can't do that," I protested. "He has no grounds. He has 3 signed statements from concerned friends attesting to your increasingly unstable behavior and his own injuries as evidence that someone, implied to be you or someone acting on your behalf, is violent. It's thin, but a judge might grant it as a precautionary measure." Fear clawed at my throat. What does this mean? "It means if the order is granted, police could come to take you for a 72-hour psychiatric hold while you're evaluated. We need to fight this immediately." Murad's voice was tight with controlled anger. "I'm heading to the courthouse now to file an emergency counter motion. In the meantime, stay put and prepare for a potential visit from law enforcement." I relayed the information to Dad and Aunt Vespera. watching their expressions shift from shock to outrage. "This is exactly how it works," Dad said, pacing the kitchen. "Create doubt about the victim's mental stability. Use the system against them. Make them appear unstable by provoking fear and anxiety. We need to remain calm and think strategically," Aunt Vespera insisted. "Alina, gather the evidence we've compiled, your journal, the photographs, everything. If officers come, you present as completely rational and willing to cooperate, but insist on having your attorney present for any evaluation." The next few hours passed in tense preparation. I organized my documentation, rehearsed calm responses to potential questions, and tried to ignore the growing panic in my chest. Every passing car, every distant siren sent my heart racing. This, I realized, was part of Elliot's strategy too, keeping me in a constant state of fear, which itself could present as paranoia to outside observers. Mid-afternoon, Murad returned with cautiously good news. The judge had denied Elliot's petition for an emergency psychiatric hold, citing insufficient evidence and the ongoing restraining order proceedings. However, she warned, this was likely just the first salvo in what promised to be a protracted legal battle. "He's pulled out all the stops," she explained grimly. "Hired Thornfield and Associates, one of the most aggressive divorce firms in the state. They're already filing motions to dismiss the restraining order based on new evidence of your alleged mental instability." "So what's our next move?" Dad asked. Murad's expression hardened. "We accelerate as planned. I've filed the divorce papers and submitted our application for a permanent protection order with all the evidence we've gathered. Now we need to execute the second part of our strategy, the controlled exposure of Elliot's behavior to key individuals in his life." I hesitated, sudden doubt creeping in. What if that just makes him more dangerous? He's already demonstrated how far he'll go to maintain his image. "That's precisely why we need to act now," Aunt Vespera insisted. "The longer we wait, the more time he has to build his counter-narrative. We need to present the truth first, before his lies take root." Dad looked at me steadily. "The decision is yours, Alina. We can proceed as planned, or we can find another approach." I thought of the past 7 years, the slow erosion of my confidence, the isolation, the fear that had become so normal I barely recognized it as abnormal anymore. I thought of my mother, trapped in a similar marriage until death seemed the only escape. And I thought of Elliot, calculating and ruthless, willing to use any tactic to maintain control. "We proceed," I said finally, "but carefully. No exaggeration, no emotional appeals, just the documented truth." The plan we executed over the next 2 days was methodical and precise. Aunt Vespera had compiled a dossier for each key person in Elliot's life: his boss, senior colleagues, clients, and parents. Each contained copies of my journal entries describing specific incidents of abuse, photographs of injuries with dates and context, and a carefully worded letter expressing concern for Elliot's well-being, rather than seeking punishment or revenge. "We're not trying to destroy Elliot," Dad explained as we prepared the packages. "We're creating a situation where the only way forward for him is to acknowledge his behavior and seek help. We're removing his ability to maintain the facade that has enabled his abuse." The packages were delivered by courier, timed to arrive simultaneously to prevent Elliot from getting ahead of the narrative. We knew the impact would not be immediate. People would need time to process the information, to reconcile the charming man they knew with the monster documented in our evidence. What we didn't anticipate was the swift and devastating counterattack. It began with a call from Murad, her voice tense with urgency. "Elliot has filed criminal charges against all 3 of you: harassment, defamation, extortion, and conspiracy. He's claiming the packages were part of an orchestrated attempt to destroy his reputation unless he agreed to a financially punitive divorce settlement. But there was no demand for money, I protested. No threat at all. He's claiming the threat was implied and that previous conversations included explicit demands. He's presenting text messages that appear to support his claim. Fabricated texts, Dad said grimly. He's falsifying evidence now. Most likely, Murad agreed, but it complicates our situation significantly. The police may be coming to question all of you, possibly with arrest warrants, depending on how convincing Elliot's evidence appears. The next blow came from an unexpected quarter. Dad's phone rang, his assistant at the charitable foundation he ran, calling in panic because reporters were gathering outside the office, asking about allegations that Harlan Zemaitis had a history of domestic violence against his late wife. How could they possibly know that? I whispered, horrified. The only people who knew were in this house. Dad's face went ashen. The medical examiner, he said quietly, when your mother died, there was an investigation because of the suicide. The examiner noted evidence of prior physical abuse. I admitted everything then, but the records were sealed as part of the agreement with the prosecutor to avoid charges. Elliot found the records, Aunt Vespera concluded, her expression grim, or paid someone to find them. He's using your past to discredit you now, painting you as an abuser trying to project your own guilt onto him. It was an elegant, vicious move, one that threatened to undermine our entire strategy. By exposing Dad's past, Elliot had not only redirected public attention away from his own behavior, but had also created a plausible alternative narrative that I was being manipulated by my formerly abusive father for his own purposes. The final attack came that evening, a formal notification that Elliot had filed for an emergency injunction against all three of us, prohibiting any contact with him or anyone in his professional circle, effectively neutralizing our strategy of exposure. He's outplayed us, I admitted, as we gathered in the kitchen, the weight of defeat heavy in the air. Every move we make, he counters with something more devastating. Not outplayed, Dad insisted. Not yet. He's revealed his playbook now, his willingness to use any tactic, no matter how underhanded. That knowledge is valuable. Aunt Vespera nodded in agreement. Your father is right. This is not defeat. It's information. Now we know exactly what we're dealing with, and we adjust accordingly. But adjust how? Elliot had systematically dismantled our legal strategy, turned public opinion against my father, and positioned himself as the victim of a vindictive conspiracy. We were running out of conventional options. The answer came from an unexpected source. As we debated our next move, my new phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously, half expecting another police officer or lawyer with more bad news. Instead, a woman's voice, tentative, frightened. Is this Alina? Alina Thorne? Yes, I confirmed. Who is this? My name is Imani Castellano. I found your journal in your studio at the house. My heart raced. In the chaos of the past days, I'd completely forgotten about the journal I'd hidden in my old studio, the one documenting years of Elliot's abuse that we'd been unable to retrieve during our police-escorted visit. You're in our house? I asked, confused. How? Why? A hesitation. I was with Elliot. He asked me to move in 2 days ago after he came home from the hospital, said his mentally unstable wife had left him and he needed support. Her voice cracked slightly. I found your journal hidden in the wall of the studio while I was measuring for new furniture. I read it and the things you described. They're exactly like things that happened in my previous relationship. I put the call on speaker so Dad and Aunt Vespera could hear. Imani, are you safe right now? Is Elliot there? No, he's at a meeting with his lawyers. I don't have much time. Her voice strengthened with resolve. I believe you, Alina. Everything in your journal, it's too specific, too real to be invented. And this morning, when I questioned something Elliot said, I saw a look in his eyes that I recognized from my ex, that cold rage that comes just before. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew exactly what she meant. "What can I do?" I asked. "How can I help you?" "It's not me who needs help," Imani replied. "It's you." Elliot he's planning something bad. I overheard him on the phone with someone talking about making sure you couldn't damage his reputation anymore. He said something about permanent solutions and making it look like she finally snapped. I think he might be planning to hurt you, Alina. Maybe worse. Ice flooded my veins. Did you hear any specifics? Any timeline? No, just that it would happen soon. Tomorrow, maybe? He was very careful about details. Imani's voice dropped even lower. There's something else. In his home office, there's a safe behind the painting of the yacht. The combination is 3571. Inside, there's a flash drive labeled Insurance. I haven't been able to access it, but given everything else. "Thank you for telling me this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should leave that house as soon as possible. It isn't safe." "I'm already packed," she confirmed. "I'm going to my sister's in another state." "He doesn't know about her." A pause. "Alina, be careful. Men like Elliot and my ex, when they feel cornered, there's nothing they won't do to regain control." After the call ended, we sat in stunned silence, processing this new information. "We need to contact the police immediately," Dad insisted. "If Elliot is planning violence." "With what evidence?" Aunt Vespera interrupted. "An overheard partial conversation reported by a woman who will be gone by the time police investigate. They won't act on that, especially given Elliot's counter-narrative about Alina's mental state." "So we do nothing?" Dad demanded. "Wait for him to make his move?" "No," Aunt Vespera said firmly. "We prepare." And we find that flash drive. The plan that emerged was dangerous but necessary. While Dad contacted Officers Kendrick and Pelletier to report our concerns, not expecting immediate action, but creating an official record, Aunt Vesper and I would return to the house to retrieve the flash drive from Elliot's safe. With Imani's information about his meeting with lawyers, we had a narrow window of opportunity. "This is breaking and entering," Murad warned when we called to inform her. "Legally, I cannot advise this course of action." "Understood," Aunt Vespera replied crisply. "Consider yourself not consulted." We moved quickly, driving to the house in Aunt Vespera's rental car. The neighborhood was quiet in the early evening, no sign of Elliot's Mercedes in the driveway. Using my key, which still worked despite everything, we entered cautiously, prepared to leave immediately if there was any indication Elliot had returned early. The house was eerily silent, with subtle changes that indicated Imani's brief residence. A different coffee mug in the sink, an unfamiliar scarf draped over a chair. I led Aunt Vespera to Elliot's home office, a room I'd rarely entered during our marriage. It had been his private domain, and my presence there had always been treated as an intrusion. The painting of the yacht hung exactly where Imani had described, an expensive commission depicting Elliot at the helm of a boat he'd chartered once for a client meeting, pretending it was his own. Behind it, as promised, was a wall safe. "Keep watch at the window," Aunt Vespera instructed. "I'll handle the safe." I positioned myself to monitor the driveway while Aunt Vespera deftly entered the combination. The soft click of the safe opening seemed abnormally loud in the silent house. "Got it," she said after a moment. "One flash drive, labeled exactly as described. Let's go." We were at the front door when headlights swept across the driveway, Elliot's car turning in from the street. There was no time to exit unseen. "Back door," I whispered urgently, pulling Aunt Vespera toward the kitchen. We slipped out the rear entrance just as the front door opened, ducking behind the garden shed as Elliot's voice carried through the open doorway. "I don't care what it costs," he was saying to someone on the phone. "I want it handled tonight. No delays." We made our way carefully around the perimeter of the yard, staying in the shadows until we reached Aunt Vespera's car, parked a block away. Only when we were driving away did the tension release from my body, replaced immediately by new fear. What had Elliot meant about wanting it handled tonight? Back at Dad's house, we immediately connected the flash drive to my laptop. It contained dozens of files, financial records, emails, photographs. As we sorted through them, the nature of Elliot's insurance became clear. He had been meticulously documenting compromising information about colleagues, clients, even friends, anything that could be used as leverage if needed. But the most chilling discovery was a folder labeled with my name. Inside were digitally altered photographs of me appearing to abuse drugs, falsified medical records suggesting a history of psychiatric problems, and a document outlining a detailed plan to have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility with the ultimate goal of gaining control of all our assets and protecting his reputation. "This is his endgame," Dad said, reading over my shoulder. "Not just winning the divorce, but destroying you completely so no one would ever believe your accusations." More disturbing still was a subfolder containing surveillance photos of me at the grocery store, walking in the park, entering my doctor's office, all taken within the past few months. Elliot had been monitoring me long before our final confrontation, preparing for a scenario where I might try to leave. "We need to copy all of this," Aunt Vespera insisted. "It's evidence of premeditation if he attempts anything." As we worked to back up the files, Murad called with alarming news. "The police are on their way to your father's house with a warrant for all three of you. Elliot has apparently produced evidence, witnesses, texts, emails, suggesting you're planning to attack him tonight. Given his previous home invasion injuries, they're taking the threat seriously." That's what he meant about having it handled tonight. I realized, panic rising. He's using the police to remove us so he can execute whatever plan he has. "You need to leave immediately," Murad advised. "I'll meet you at my office to strategize, but you cannot be there when the police arrive." We moved with desperate efficiency, copying the remaining files, gathering essential documents, and hurrying to Dad's car. As we pulled away from the house, we saw police cruisers turning onto the street behind us. "This is insane," I said, my voice shaking. "How can he manipulate the entire system like this? Money, connections, and a lifetime of practice?" Dad replied grimly. "Men like Elliot know exactly how to work the system to their advantage." At Morode's office, a modern glass building downtown, we were ushered into a conference room where we explained everything: Imani's warning, the flash drive contents, Elliot's apparent plan to have us arrested on false charges. Murad listened attentively, her expression growing more troubled with each new detail. "The evidence on this drive is damning," she acknowledged, "but obtaining it through breaking and entering complicates its use legally. We'd need to find a way to discover this information through legitimate channels." "Legitimate?" "There isn't time for legal niceties," Aunt Vespera insisted. "Elliot is actively trying to harm Alina right now." "I understand the urgency," Murad replied, "but we need to be strategic. If we move against Elliot with illegally obtained evidence, we could undermine our entire case." The debate continued as night deepened outside the conference room windows. Various approaches were considered and rejected: going public with the evidence despite its questionable provenance, turning it over to police and risking charges for the break-in, using it as leverage in direct negotiations with Elliot. "None of these options addresses the immediate threat," Dad finally said. "Elliot believes we're being arrested tonight. When he discovers that didn't happen, he'll accelerate whatever he's planning." A heavy silence fell as we confronted the reality of our situation. Legal remedies would take time we didn't have. police protection was compromised by Elliot's influence and counter-narrative. Running away would only delay the inevitable, while surrendering what little leverage we had. I need to confront him, I said suddenly, the clarity of the decision surprising even me. Directly. Tonight. Absolutely not, Dad insisted. It's too dangerous. It's the only way, I countered. Elliot thrives in shadows, manipulating systems and people from a distance. His power diminishes in direct confrontation, especially when his target refuses to play the role he's assigned them. She's right, Aunt Vespera said quietly. Men like Elliot expect their victims to follow the script, to be afraid, to hide, to beg. When that expectation is subverted, they often lose their carefully maintained control. It's still too risky, Dad argued. What if he becomes violent when confronted? That's why I won't go alone, I explained, the plan forming as I spoke. We'll create a scenario where Elliot believes he has the upper hand, only to discover he's been outmaneuvered. Over the next hour, a strategy emerged, dangerous, legally questionable, but offering our best chance at neutralizing the threat Elliot posed once and for all. Murad excused herself from the specific planning, unable as an officer of the court to participate in anything potentially illegal, but providing general guidance on how to minimize legal exposure. Whatever happens, she advised before leaving, remember that your primary goal is safety, not justice. Justice can come later, through proper channels. Tonight is about survival. With Murad gone, we finalized the details. Dad would make a call to Elliot, informing him that we had escaped the police and had evidence that could destroy him unless he agreed to meet for negotiations. The meeting would take place at Dad's house, familiar territory where we could control the environment. Aunt Vespera would be hidden nearby with the gun, ready to intervene if necessary, and I would confront Elliot directly, with a specific goal in mind. Are you sure about this? Dad asked as he prepared to make the call. Once we start this, there's no turning back. I thought about the past 7 years of my life, the fear, the isolation, the gradual erosion of my identity. I thought about my mother choosing death over continued subjugation. And I thought about Elliot, so confident in his ability to control and manipulate everyone around him. I'm sure, I said. Make the call. Elliot agreed to the meeting with surprising readiness, a fact that might have concerned me more if I hadn't already been operating at peak anxiety. We drove back to Dad's house, arriving just as the police were leaving, presumably having found no one to arrest. Perfect timing, Aunt Vespera noted grimly. Now we have approximately 30 minutes to prepare before Elliot arrives. The preparation was minimal, but essential. Dad positioned security cameras to record the entire encounter, evidence that might be crucial later. Aunt Vespera took up position in Dad's study, adjacent to the living room where the confrontation would occur, with a clear sightline through the partially open door. I changed into clothes that made me appear more vulnerable than I felt, a reminder to Elliot of the woman he believed he could control. As headlights swept across the front windows, announcing Elliot's arrival, Dad squeezed my hand reassuringly. Remember the plan. No matter what he says or does, stick to the script. I nodded, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. Whatever happened next would end the nightmare, one way or another. Elliot entered without knocking, his handsome features arranged in an expression of concerned frustration that I now recognized as entirely manufactured. He wore an expensive suit, as if coming from a business meeting, rather than orchestrating my destruction. "Alina," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of exasperation, "this has gone far enough. You need help, not this crusade your father has enlisted you in." I remained silent, letting him continue his performance. "I understand you're confused and frightened," he went on, moving further into the living room where Dad and I stood. "Your father has clearly influenced you with his own guilt and paranoia. But it's not too late to fix this. I've arranged for the best psychiatric care. We can put this unfortunate episode behind us. Dad stepped forward. We have the flash drive, Elliot. We know about your insurance and your plans for Alina. A flicker of genuine emotion crossed Elliot's face, surprise quickly masked by renewed concern. I don't know what you're talking about. What flash drive? The one from your safe, I said, speaking for the first time. Behind the yacht painting, the one with detailed plans to have me committed, along with all the blackmail material you've collected on your colleagues. Elliot's mask slipped further, calculation replacing feigned confusion. Accessing my private safe without permission, that's breaking and entering. Another crime to add to the harassment, defamation, and conspiracy charges already pending against you. Perhaps, Dad acknowledged, but the contents of that drive are now secured with multiple copies in various locations. If anything happens to any of us, the information goes public instantly. It was a bluff. We'd made copies, certainly, but not established the dead man's switch Dad was implying. Elliot studied us, clearly weighing his options. What do you want? He asked finally, his voice hardening. Money? Is that what this elaborate charade has been about? I shook my head. I want freedom, Elliot. Freedom from fear, from control, from you. I want a divorce with a fair division of assets and a permanent restraining order. He laughed, the sound chilling in its genuine amusement. After everything you've done, the false accusations, the attacks on my reputation, the conspiracy with your criminal father, you'll be lucky to avoid prison, let alone receive any assets. We have evidence of your abuse, Dad said calmly, documented incidents, photographs, witness statements, and I have evidence of your history as a domestic abuser, Elliot countered smoothly, along with documentation of Alina's increasing mental instability and your conspiracy to extort me. We could battle in court for years, destroying each other publicly, or ... quote. He paused, a new calculation visible in his eyes. We could resolve this privately, like reasonable people. This was the moment we'd anticipated. Elliot's pivot to negotiation once he believed force and manipulation had failed. The moment when he would reveal what he truly wanted, what he believed would give him the upper hand. What are you proposing? I asked cautiously. Elliot straightened his already perfect tie. A clean break. You withdraw all accusations and agree to a confidential settlement. I'll provide a reasonable financial package, not the fortune you're clearly hoping for, but enough to start fresh somewhere far away from here. In exchange, all copies of my private information are returned, and we never speak of any of this again. And if I refuse? His smile was cold. Then I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure you spend the next decade fighting legal battles. Your father's reputation will be destroyed completely. Your aunt will face criminal charges for her role in the conspiracy. And you, Alina, you'll be formally diagnosed with the mental health issues that have clearly been affecting your judgment. The threat was delivered with such casual confidence that for a moment I felt the old fear returning, the certainty that Elliot would always win, would always be 3 steps ahead, would always find a way to control the narrative and therefore my life. But something had changed in me over the past days. The woman who had stood crying in the snow as Elliot abandoned her was gone, replaced by someone stronger, clearer, more determined. I saw Elliot now, not as an all-powerful force, but as a deeply insecure man whose entire self-worth depended on maintaining the illusion of control. No, I said simply. Elliot blinked, genuinely surprised. No? Perhaps you didn't understand the alternatives I'm offering? I understood perfectly. You're offering a choice between surrender and destruction, but there's a third option you haven't considered. And what's that? He asked, his tone patronizing. I met his gaze steadily. The truth, Elliot. Simply the truth, told openly and without fear. He laughed again, but with less conviction. The truth? Whose truth? Your distorted perceptions? Your father's guilt-driven delusions? The objective truth, I replied, documented in your own words, your own plans, your own actions. I took a deep breath, including your plan to have me committed tonight based on fabricated evidence. Elliot's expression hardened. You can't prove any of that. Actually, we can, Dad interjected, gesturing to the security cameras visibly recording in the corners of the room. Everything you've said tonight is being recorded. Combined with the evidence from your flash drive and the testimony of your newest girlfriend, Imani, it creates a compelling case. The mention of Imani visibly startled Elliot. What are you talking about? What newest girlfriend? The woman you moved into our house 2 days ago, I clarified. The one who found my hidden journal and recognized your behavior patterns from her previous abusive relationship. The one who overheard you planning to handle us tonight and warned us instead. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Elliot's features, quickly replaced by cold fury. You're lying. There's no Imani who would betray me. This is another fabrication. Like the home invasion that left you injured? I asked quietly. Like the witnesses who testified to my mental instability? Like the evidence you manufactured to have us arrested tonight? Elliot moved with unexpected speed, closing the distance between us in 2 long strides. His hand wrapped around my throat, not squeezing, but holding, a demonstration of power, a reminder of what he was capable of. You think you're so clever, he hissed, his handsome face contorted with rage. You think you can outmaneuver me? I built an empire while you were playing at being an architect. I navigated boardrooms and million-dollar deals while you arranged furniture and chose paint colors. Don't presume to think you can win against me. I didn't struggle or pull away. Instead, I held his gaze steadily, allowing the security cameras to capture his hand on my throat, his threatening posture, the naked aggression in his expression. I already have won, Elliot. The moment I stopped being afraid of you, something in my calm certainty seemed to unnerve him. His grip loosened slightly. What do you want? Really? Tell me your price. I told you, freedom. A divorce, a restraining order, a fair division of assets. I paused, then added, and your participation in a comprehensive domestic violence intervention program. He released me abruptly, stepping back with a bark of laughter. Therapy? You think I need therapy? I think you need help, Elliot. The kind of help my father sought after my mother died. The kind that might allow you to build real connections instead of manipulating everyone around you. This is absurd, he muttered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. I don't need help. I'm not the one making outlandish accusations and breaking into private safes. Then how do you explain this? Dad asked, producing a tablet displaying security footage from our bedroom. Elliot screaming in my face as I cowered against the wall. The date stamp indicated it was from 3 months earlier. Or this. Another video showing Elliot throwing a glass that shattered near my head. Or perhaps this. A third video of Elliot dragging me by the arm through our living room. Elliot stared at the footage, genuine confusion replacing anger. Where did you get these? There are no cameras in our house. Not that you installed, I confirmed, but ones that I did after the 3rd time you put your hands on me. Hidden cameras capturing the reality of our marriage that you worked so hard to conceal. It was another bluff. There had never been hidden cameras in our house. The footage was actually security video from Dad's house, digitally altered by a technology expert Aunt Vespera had contacted. But Elliot had no way of knowing that, and his expression revealed he believed the deception completely. You recorded me without my knowledge or consent, he said, grasping for a counterattack. That's illegal in this state without dual-party consent. Inadmissible in court, perhaps, Dad acknowledged, but devastatingly effective in the court of public opinion. Imagine your clients, your colleagues, your parents seeing these videos. Imagine the carefully constructed reputation you've built collapsing overnight. Elliot paled visibly. You wouldn't dare. We don't want to, I said truthfully. That's not the goal here, Elliot. We don't want to destroy you. We want this to end peacefully, fairly, with dignity for everyone involved. A long silence followed as Elliot processed the dramatic reversal of his situation. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its commanding edge. What specifically are you proposing? A negotiated divorce settlement with a non-disparagement clause on both sides, Dad replied. A fair financial division that acknowledges Alina's contributions to the marriage. Your enrollment in a reputable intervention program for domestic abusers, and your permanent absence from Alina's life. And in exchange? Elliot asked, his business instincts reasserting themselves. We keep the videos, the flash drive contents, and all other evidence private, I said. Your public reputation remains intact, provided you comply fully with the agreement. Another long silence as Elliot calculated his options. I could almost see the wheels turning behind his eyes, assessing risks, weighing potential outcomes, searching for angles and leverage. I'll need guarantees, he said finally. Legal assurances that you won't release anything regardless of how our negotiations proceed. Of course, Dad agreed. Everything properly documented and legally binding? Elliot nodded slowly, the fight visibly draining from him as he accepted the inevitability of compromise. I want my attorney present for any formal agreement and verification that all copies of my private data are secured and eventually returned. Reasonable requests, I acknowledged. We can arrange a formal meeting tomorrow with all parties and their legal representation. The negotiation continued for another hour, establishing the framework for what would ultimately become our divorce settlement. Throughout, I marveled at the transformation, not in Elliot, who remained fundamentally the same manipulative person beneath his temporary defeat, but in myself. The fear that had defined my existence for 7 years was gone, replaced by a calm certainty that whatever happened, I would never again surrender my power to anyone. As Elliot finally prepared to leave, making arrangements for the formal meeting the next day, he paused at the door. You've changed, he observed, studying me with genuine curiosity. When did that happen? I thought about the question seriously. Was it the moment Dad rescued me from the snowy roadside? The revelation about my mother's true fate? The discovery of Elliot's elaborate plans for my destruction? No, the change had been more gradual, a slow accumulation of strength and clarity that had finally reached critical mass. I've always been this person, Elliot, I replied. You just worked very hard to make sure neither of us saw it. After he left, Aunt Vespra emerged from the study, the gun thankfully never having been needed. It worked, she observed with quiet satisfaction, though I admit I had my doubts. It worked for tonight, Dad cautioned. But men like Elliot, like I once was, they don't change their nature because of one defeat. They adapt, recalculate, find new avenues of attack. I know, I acknowledged. This isn't the end. But it's a beginning. The beginning of my life without fear. The months that followed proved Dad right about Elliot's nature. The formal divorce negotiations were contentious, with Elliot's attorneys fighting for every dollar and challenging every claim. The non-disparagement agreement was signed, but tested repeatedly, as Elliot sought subtle ways to undermine my credibility without explicitly violating the terms. The intervention program was attended, but, according to the facilitator who provided regular reports to the court, with minimal engagement or insight. Yet through it all, I maintained the inner strength I discovered during those pivotal days after Elliot abandoned me in the snow. Each challenge was met with calm determination rather than fearful capitulation. Each manipulation attempt was recognized and neutralized. Each threat, whether implied or explicit, was documented and addressed through proper channels. A year after that snowy night, the divorce was final. The financial settlement, while not as substantial as I might have received through a more combative process, provided enough for me to restart my architectural career and establish a new life. The restraining order remained in place, a legal barrier between Elliot's world and mine. Dad sold his house. Too many difficult memories, he said, and moved to a smaller place closer to my new apartment. Our relationship deepened as we both processed the truths that had been revealed, the patterns that had shaped our lives, the healing that remained to be done. Aunt Vespra returned to Switzerland but visited regularly. Her fierce protectiveness softened, but not diminished by time and distance. On the anniversary of that pivotal night, Dad invited me to dinner at his new home, a cozy condo with walls covered in photographs chronicling our family's history, including new images from the past year of rebuilding. As we shared a meal he'd prepared with his newly discovered culinary skills, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey we'd undertaken together. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked him, "revealing the truth about your past with Mom?" "It cost you so much. Your reputation at the foundation, friendships, public standing." Dad considered the question seriously. "I regret the actions that created that past, the man I was, the pain I caused, but revealing the truth, that was necessary, not just for your safety, but for my continued growth." He smiled sadly. "The foundation will recover. Some friendships have already been repaired through honesty, and my public standing matters far less to me than being a father you can trust." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I do trust you, more than I ever have." "Thank you," he said simply. Then with a slight hesitation, "There's something I wanted to give you tonight. Something I've been saving for the right moment." He retrieved a small wooden box from a drawer in the sideboard. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet I recognized immediately, my mother's favorite piece of jewelry, one I'd always admired as a child. "She wanted you to have this when you found true happiness," Dad explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't feel worthy of passing it on until now, until I saw you reclaim your power and rebuild your life." As he fastened the bracelet around my wrist, I felt a profound sense of completion. A circle closed, a legacy honored, a future secured. "Do you remember what you said to me that night in the snow?" I asked. "When you found me on the roadside?" Dad nodded. "I said I would always come for you." "And you did," I confirmed. "But more importantly, you taught me how to come for myself, how to recognize my own strength, claim my own power, fight my own battles. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become," he said softly. I thought about my mother, the woman I'd known, and the woman I'd never truly seen, whose suffering had been hidden behind careful facades and whose death had set in motion the transformation of the man sitting across from me. "I think," I said carefully, "that she would be proud of both of us." And in that moment, surrounded by the warm light of my father's new home, wearing my mother's bracelet like a talisman of resilience, I understood the true significance of what my father and I had done that night when confronting Elliot. We hadn't just outmaneuvered a manipulative abuser or secured a favorable divorce settlement. We had broken a generational cycle of abuse, transforming pain into power, secrets into strength, fear into freedom. That was what had made Elliot drop to his knees in defeat, Not our legal strategies or tactical maneuvers, but the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter who had faced their darkest truths together and emerged stronger for it. In that snowstorm, when Dad wrapped me in a blanket and brought me home, we began a journey toward healing that neither of us could have undertaken alone. And in that healing, we found the ultimate victory, not over Elliot, but over the fear that had defined our lives for far too long.